It should never have happened. He was my husband's nephew. The night my husband Tom let me play with this nephew for a few days was the most amazing time of my life. He asked me to look after his 18-year-old nephew Jake while he was away for a few days on a business trip. The most amazing time of my life was about to unfold, and I didn't expect it. This happened a few weeks ago. We had looked after his nephew before, and we had a few awkward encounters I hadn't quite put my finger on. Encounters such as light brushes in the hallway, glances over the kitchen counter as we had dinner. I never expected my life would change so dramatically when Tom asked me to take in his 18-year-old son Jake for the summer. As I lounged on our back patio, sipping a mojito in my black bikini, I reflected on how we got here. Tom and I had been married for 5 years now. At 42, he was a successful real estate developer, distinguished with salt and pepper hair, and a fit physique from his daily workouts. I was 35, kept myself in shape teaching yoga, and turned plenty of heads with my long blonde hair and curvy 5'7" frame. When Tom first told me about Jake needing a place to stay before college, I was happy to help. Jake's mom had moved across the country years ago, leaving Tom to raise him. Now Jake needed stability as he prepared for his freshman year at the local university. The past few weeks with Jake living in our guest room had been interesting. At 18, he was the spitting image of a younger Tom, same strong jawline, same piercing blue eyes. But where Tom was polished and reserved, Jake had a wild energy about him. His shaggy dark hair and athletic build from years of swimming gave him a carefree California surfer vibe. I'd catch him watching me sometimes when I did my morning yoga in the living room, wearing my tight leggings and sports bra. His eyes would linger a moment too long before quickly looking away. I told myself it was nothing, just a teenager being a teenager. He was practically my nephew after all. "Hun, can we talk?" Tom's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. He settled into the lounge chair beside me, looking concerned. "What's up, babe?" I adjusted my bikini top, suddenly aware of how much cleavage I was showing. "I need to head to Chicago for a big development deal. I'll be gone for 4 days next week." "Oh?" I took another sip of my drink, the mint leaves tickling my lips. "I hate leaving Jake alone right now. He needs guidance getting ready for college." Tom reached over and squeezed my thigh. "Would you keep an eye on him? Make sure he stays on track?" I nodded, trying to ignore the way his touch made my skin tingle. "Of course, he's family." "Thanks, baby. Take care of him like he's your own." Tom leaned in and kissed me deeply, his hand sliding higher up my thigh. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake a growing sense of anticipation about the week ahead. I told myself I was just being silly. Jake was Tom's son, nothing more. But as I drifted off to sleep, my dreams were filled with flashes of those piercing blue eyes. Sleep eluded me that night as memories from the past few weeks flooded my mind. There had been moments. Small instances that made my breath catch and my heart race, though I tried desperately to dismiss them. 2 weeks ago, I'd been in the kitchen making breakfast in my silk robe. Jake had stumbled in, shirtless and groggy from sleep, his swim team sweats hanging dangerously low on his hips. We'd collided as I turned from the fridge, my hands landing on his bare chest to steady myself. His skin was warm, impossibly smooth under my fingers. "Sorry, Aunt Sarah," he'd mumbled, but didn't move away. His hands had found my waist, steadying me through the thin silk. For several heartbeats we stood frozen, my fingers splayed across his pecs, feeling his heart hammering beneath them. The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the flecks of gold in his eyes. Then there was last weekend. I'd been swimming laps in our pool, losing myself in the rhythm of strokes. Coming up for air, I'd found Jake sitting on the edge, watching me with an intensity that made my stomach flip. "Mind if I join?" he'd asked, already pulling off his shirt. I'd nodded, not trusting my voice. We swam in companionable silence, but I felt his presence like electricity in the water. At one point, our legs brushed underwater, just the slightest touch, but it sent shivers through my whole body. When I pulled myself out of the pool, water streaming down my body, I felt his eyes following every drop. But the most dangerous moment had been just yesterday. I was reaching for a bowl on the top shelf in the kitchen, my tank top riding up. Jake came up behind me, his chest pressing against my back as he easily grabbed the bowl. Instead of stepping away, he lingered. His breath tickled my neck, his free hand ghosting over my exposed hip. "Here," he'd whispered, his lips nearly grazing my ear. The bowl had clattered onto the counter as I spun around, finding myself trapped between his arms, our faces inches apart. For one wild moment, I thought he might kiss me. I wasn't sure if I would have stopped him. Tom's voice from the other room had shattered the moment. Jake backed away like he'd been burned, running a hand through his disheveled hair. But his eyes, God, his eyes stayed locked on mine with an hunger that haunted me. Now, lying in bed, I pressed my thighs together as the memories washed over me. The way Jake looked at me wasn't how a nephew should look at his aunt. And the way my body responded to his presence wasn't how I should react to my stepson. "It's just attraction," I whispered to myself in the dark. "Natural biological chemistry. Nothing more." But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. There was something raw and primal building between us, something that Tom's impending business trip might unleash. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made my whole body hum with anticipation. I rolled over, burying my face in my pillow. 4 days alone with Jake. 4 days of dancing around this crackling tension. 4 days of trying to be responsible while fighting the urge to. "Stop," I commanded myself. "He's your stepson. He trusts you. Tom trusts you." But as I finally drifted off to sleep, my dreams were filled with warm skin, gentle touches, and eyes that promised to consume me whole. The morning Tom left, I stood in our driveway watching his BMW disappear around the corner. The late June air was already thick with humidity, making my sundress cling to my skin. As I turned to head back inside, I saw Jake watching from his bedroom window. He quickly disappeared behind the curtain, but not before I caught the intensity in his gaze. That evening, I was chopping vegetables for dinner when Jake wandered into the kitchen wearing gym shorts and a fitted tank that showed off his swimmer's build. "Need help?" he asked, reaching past me for a cutting board, his arm brushing against mine. "Sure," I breathed, hyper-aware of his proximity. "You can start on the garlic." We worked in companionable silence, the only sounds the rhythmic chopping and the soft music playing from my phone. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. Every time Jake reached around me for ingredients, his chest would brush my back, lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Here, like this," I found myself saying, stepping behind him to correct his knife technique. My hands covered his larger ones, guiding the blade. His breath hitched as I pressed against him. I could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, clean sweat and chlorine from his morning swim. "I've always loved watching you cook," Jake murmured, his voice deeper than usual. He turned his head slightly, his lips inches from my ear. "The way you move around the kitchen, it's like dancing." My hand stilled on his, but I didn't pull away. "Jake." It was meant as a warning, but came out more like a plea. He slowly turned to face me, trapping me between his body and the counter. His eyes dropped to my lips, then lower, taking in the way my sundress dipped on me. "Sarah," he whispered, one hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from my face. "I can't stop thinking about you." The knife clattered to the counter as his fingers trailed down my neck, leaving fire in their wake. My heart thundered against my ribs. This was wrong, so wrong, but my body was betraying me, arching into his touch. "Tell me you don't feel it too," he murmured, his thumb tracing my collarbone. "This thing between us. It's been building since I got here." I closed my eyes, trying to gather my willpower. "You're my stepson." "Look at me," he commanded softly. When I opened my eyes, the raw need I saw in his made my knees weak. "Tell me you don't want this." The pasta water began boiling over, hissing as it hit the stovetop. I used the distraction to duck under his arm, my whole body trembling. "We should focus on dinner," I said shakily, turning down the heat. But as I stirred the pasta, I felt Jake step up behind me again. His hands settled on my hips, his breath hot on my neck. "We both know this isn't over," he whispered before stepping away. The rest of dinner prep was torture. Stolen glances, lingering touches, the air thick with unspoken desire. By the time we sat down to eat, I was a mess of conflicting emotions. Guilt warred with want, propriety with primal need. As Jake's foot brushed mine under the table, I knew with terrifying certainty that my resolve was crumbling. 3 more days alone with him. 3 more days of this exquisite tension. Later that evening, I retreated to the sanctuary of my home office, trying to create some distance by focusing on Jake's college preparations. He lounged on the leather sofa across from my desk while I reviewed his class schedule. "Pre-med is demanding," I said, grateful for the solid oak desk between us. "Your father mentioned you were worried about the workload." Jake ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so like his father's it made my heart ache. "Yeah, the biology requirements are intense, but that's not what's really bothering me." I looked up, catching the vulnerability in his expression. "Talk to me." He shifted, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Everyone expects me to follow Dad's footsteps. You know, become the successful doctor, marry young, have the perfect life mapped out." His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating under those expectations." The raw honesty in his voice drew me in. I moved around the desk, sitting beside him but maintaining a careful distance. "I understand that pressure. Before I met your father, I was supposed to take over my family's business. Everyone had my life planned out." "What changed?" His thigh brushed mine as he turned to face me. "I realized I had to live for myself, not others' expectations." I smiled softly. "That's how I found yoga, started teaching. It wasn't the safe choice, but it was mine." "Sarah," he breathed, and I could hear everything he wasn't saying in that single word. I reluctantly pulled my hand away, standing abruptly. "We should look at your housing forms," I said, voice shaky. "Make sure everything's in order." For the next hour, we buried ourselves in paperwork, but the undercurrent remained. Every time our fingers brushed passing documents, every shared glance, every soft laugh built upon the foundation of understanding we'd created. It wasn't just physical attraction anymore. This emotional intimacy was far more dangerous. As Jake finally stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. After he left, I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. The thunder rolling in matched the turmoil in my heart. I'd tried to maintain boundaries by focusing on his future, but somehow we'd only drawn closer. Every layer we peeled back revealed more complexity, more connection, more reasons why what I was feeling was so forbidden and so impossible to ignore. The storm finally broke that evening, rain drumming against the windows as we settled onto the couch. I'd chosen an old film noir, hoping the safe, classical choice would ease the tension. Instead, the intimate darkness only heightened it. I curled up at one end of the sofa in silk pajama shorts and an oversized t-shirt, hyper-aware of Jake's presence at the other end. The blue glow of the TV played across his features, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw. Halfway through the movie, thunder cracked and I jumped. Jake chuckled softly. "Scared of storms?" he teased, shifting closer under the pretense of sharing the throw blanket. "No," I lied, pulling my knees to my chest. But when another thunderclap boomed, I flinched again. "Come here," he murmured, opening his arm. I knew I should refuse, but found myself sliding under his embrace, my head resting against his chest. His heart pounded beneath my ear. We stayed like that, barely watching the movie, his fingers absently stroking my arm. Every touch sent electricity through my skin. When the credits finally rolled, neither of us moved. "I should head to bed," Jake finally said, but made no attempt to get up. His hand had found its way to my hair, playing with the strands. I agreed, equally reluctant to break the moment. Finally, he extracted himself, pausing to look down at me. The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. "Good night, Sarah," he whispered, then bent and pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. It was innocent enough, but his lips lingered, his breath warm against my skin. Then he was gone, leaving me trembling on the couch. Hours later, I lay in my bed, sleep eluding me. The storm had passed, but electricity still crackled in the air. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Jake's lips on my forehead, his arms around me. The memory of his heartbeat against my cheek. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. My eyes flew open, heart racing. Soft footsteps approached my door, then silence. I held my breath, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. A gentle knock. "Sarah?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you awake?" I should have pretended to be asleep. Should have sent him away. Instead, I heard myself say, "Come in." The door opened slowly. Jake stood in the doorway, illuminated by moonlight streaming through my window. He wore only pajama pants, his chest bare. My mouth went dry. "I couldn't sleep," he said softly, still hovering in the doorway. "I keep thinking about everything." I sat up, clutching the sheets to my chest, though my nightgown covered me. "Jake." "Please," he interrupted. Can I stay? Just to talk?" The vulnerability in his voice undid me. I nodded, shifting over in the king-sized bed. Jake crossed the room and slid under the covers, keeping a careful distance between us. We lay there in silence, both staring at the ceiling, electricity crackling in the space between our bodies. "I know this is wrong," he finally whispered. "I know I should see you as my stepmother. But Sarah..." He rolled onto his side, facing me. "I've never felt like this about anyone." I turned my head to look at him, finding his face inches from mine. "We can't," I breathed, but even I heard the lack of conviction in my voice. "Tell me you don't feel it too." I couldn't lie. Not here. Not now. Not with him looking at me like that. "I feel it," I whispered. His other hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb brushing my lower lip. My eyes fluttered closed as he leaned in, his breath mingling with mine. "Jake," I breathed, one last token protest. "Sarah," he answered, and closed the distance between us. His lips brushed mine with impossible gentleness, a whisper of contact that sent sparks through my entire body. Time seemed to stop, the world narrowing to this single point of connection. When he started to pull back, my hand instinctively rose to his cheek, holding him there. The second kiss was deeper, more certain. His lips moved against mine with a tenderness that made my heart ache. I could feel him trembling, or maybe I was the one shaking. His hand tangled in my hair as he drew me closer, and I tasted the mint of his toothpaste, felt the slight roughness of evening stubble against my palm. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, I saw a storm of emotions in his eyes. Desire, yes, but also fear, wonder, and something deeper that scared me more than anything. "I've wanted to do that since the first day I saw you," Jake whispered, his forehead resting against mine. "You were in the kitchen, dancing to some song on the radio. The sunlight hit your hair, and I couldn't breathe." I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the honesty in his voice. "Jake, we should talk about this. About what it means." "I know what it means." His fingers traced patterns on my shoulder, sending shivers down my spine. "It means I'm falling for someone I shouldn't want. Someone who makes me feel more alive than I've ever felt." "Your father?" I started, but he shook his head. "Don't. Please. Can we have this moment? Just us?" I opened my eyes to find him watching me with such raw vulnerability it made my chest tight. "What are we doing?" I whispered. "Following our hearts?" He smiled softly, thumb brushing my cheek. "Being honest for the first time since I got here? We could lose everything. Or find everything. His eyes dropped to my lips again. Tell me you don't feel like your whole life has been leading to this moment. Like everything makes sense when I'm with you. Instead of answering, I kissed him. This time, there was nothing gentle about it. All the weeks of tension, of fighting this attraction, poured into that kiss. His hand tightened in my hair as I pressed closer, our bodies fitting together like puzzle pieces. He tasted like possibility and danger and home all at once. When we parted, gasping for air, the look in his eyes nearly undid me. Pure adoration mixed with a hunger that made my whole body flush. Sarah, he breathed my name like a prayer. You're shaking. I'm scared, I admitted. Scared of how right this feels. Scared of wanting you this much. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me against his chest. I could hear his heart racing beneath my ear. I've never felt anything like this, he murmured into my hair. It's like I've been sleeping my whole life, and suddenly I'm awake. We can't go back from this, I whispered against his skin. I don't want to go back. His fingers traced down my spine. I want to go forward, with you. I lifted my head to look at him, seeing every emotion I felt reflected in those piercing blue eyes. When he leaned in again, I met him halfway. This kiss was slower, deeper, full of promise and possibility. His hands framed my face like I was something precious as he explored my mouth with exquisite patience. Time lost all meaning as we traded soft kisses and softer words, learning each other in this new way. Every touch felt both familiar and thrillingly new. Every shared breath brought us closer to something inevitable. Stay with me tonight, I whispered against his lips. Just stay. Nothing more. I just want to feel you close to me. His answer was another kiss, gentle and full of promise, before pulling me into his arms. As I drifted off to sleep listening to his heartbeat, I knew tomorrow would bring complications and consequences. But for now, in this perfect moment between heartbeats, nothing existed except us. Lying in Jake's arms, my mind raced through a kaleidoscope of thoughts. Every steady breath he took stirred my hair. Every subtle shift of his body against mine sent electricity through my veins. The responsible part of me screamed to pull away, to remember my place, my obligations. But a deeper part, one I'd kept locked away, whispered that this was inevitable, like gravity, like the tide, like the way flowers turn toward the sun. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my shoulder, each touch igniting nerves I didn't know I had. The darkness held our secrets, wrapped us in a cocoon where the outside world couldn't touch this fragile thing building between us. The moonlight filtering through my gauzy curtains painted silver streaks across his skin, making him look almost ethereal. My conscience waged war with my heart. I was supposed to be his guardian, his stepmother, a safe harbor. Instead, I'd become something else entirely, something that made my pulse race and my skin burn wherever he touched. The walls of my bedroom seemed to hold their breath, witnessing this transformation from forbidden to inevitable. Throughout the night, we drifted between sleep and waking, each time finding ourselves drawn closer. Sometimes just holding each other, sometimes sharing kisses that grew increasingly desperate. Words weren't necessary. The air grew thick with unspoken desires, with promises we didn't dare voice. Every suppressed moan, every shuddering breath, every time we forced ourselves to pull back. It all added to the invisible tapestry of want being woven around us. The walls absorbed our whispered confessions, our stifled gasps, the sound of hearts beating in sync. Time lost all meaning. The night stretched endless and too brief all at once. Each time I started to drift off, some small movement would ignite the fire again. His lips brushing my temple, my fingers grazing his chest, the way his breath hitched when I shifted against him. As the sun crept higher in the morning, painting golden stripes across the bed, I watched Jake sleep. His face was peaceful, younger somehow, lips slightly parted. My fingers itched to trace the line of his jaw, to wake him with kisses. Instead, I memorized this moment, The weight of his arm across my waist, the warmth of his skin against mine, the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks. The house creaked and settled around us, as if adjusting to this new reality. These walls would forever echo with the memory of this night, not just of what happened, but of what was held back. Of desires restrained, of passion banked, but not extinguished. Of the moment when everything shifted, when stepmother and stepson became something else entirely. Something dangerous, something beautiful, something inevitable. The next morning carried a dreamlike quality. I found Jake in the kitchen, making coffee like any other day, but everything had shifted. His smile when he saw me held new meaning, and when he handed me my cup, our fingers brushed deliberately. We moved around each other in a delicate dance, hyper-aware of every near touch, every shared glance. "Let's go out today," he suggested, leaning against the counter. "I'm tired of being cooped up inside." We spent the afternoon wandering through the city's arts district, maintaining a careful distance in public while stealing heated looks when no one was watching. At a small gallery, Jake stood close behind me as I examined a painting, his breath tickling my neck as he whispered observations that made me laugh. In a crowded bookstore, we found ourselves in a secluded corner of the philosophy section, where his hand found mine between the shelves, hidden from view. The late afternoon sun found us in a hidden courtyard cafe, sharing a plate of pastries. Jake reached across the table to brush a crumb from my lip, letting his thumb linger just a moment too long. "You're beautiful when you blush," he murmured, making me flush deeper. We walked through the botanical gardens as evening approached, the setting sun painting everything in gold. The paths were nearly empty, allowing us to walk closer together, our shoulders brushing. Near a secluded fountain, Jake pulled me behind a flowering arbor, pressing me against the vine-covered wall for a kiss that left me breathless. "I've wanted to do that all day," he whispered against my lips before we reluctantly separated, conscious of potential observers. That evening, we cooked dinner together, the kitchen becoming our stage for an intimate performance. Jake stood unnecessarily close while I chopped vegetables, his hand grazing my hip as he reached past me for herbs. I found excuses to touch him, adjusting his knife technique, brushing imaginary flour from his shirt, testing the sauce on his lower lip with my thumb. The tension built with every passing hour. During dinner, Jake's foot hooked around my ankle under the table. While washing dishes, we kept catching each other's eyes in the window's reflection. Even watching TV became an exercise in restraint, sitting just far enough apart to maintain deniability while the air crackled between us. The following days fell into a similar pattern, ordinary activities charged with extraordinary meaning. We went grocery shopping, brushing against each other in narrow aisles. During a rainstorm, we sat on the covered porch, reading separate books, but sharing heated glances over the pages. Each night, we found reasons to stay up late, neither wanting to be the first to break the spell by going to bed. Jake started bringing me coffee in bed each morning, sitting on the edge of my mattress while we talked about everything and nothing. Sometimes he'd trace patterns on my arm while we spoke, each touch leaving trails of fire on my skin. Other times we'd just look at each other, entire conversations passing without words. One evening, we slow danced in the living room to old jazz records, maintaining a respectable distance when the songs began, but inevitably drawing closer until my head rested on his chest, his arms wrapped around me. The music provided cover for whispered confessions, for the sound of racing hearts. Each day brought new ways to push boundaries while keeping up appearances. We mastered the art of hidden touches, meaningful glances, double entendre conversations. The house became our sanctuary, witnessing our careful choreography of desire and restraint. But it was the quiet moments that undid me most. Catching Jake watching me with unguarded tenderness while I watered plants, finding little notes he'd hidden in my books, the way he'd absently play with my fingers while we watched movies. These innocent gestures spoke of something deeper than mere attraction, something that made my heart race and my conscience war with my feelings. As Tom's return drew nearer, our days took on an air of desperate memorization. Every shared smile, every brush of hands, every stolen kiss became precious. We were counting down the hours, knowing this bubble of possibility couldn't last forever. The walls of our home held more secrets with each passing day. Every room became charged with memories of almost moments, of lines not quite crossed. Time seemed to move too fast and too slow simultaneously, each minute precious yet painful with anticipation. We were living in a beautiful limbo, suspended between what was proper and what was passionate, between duty and desire. And through it all, one question haunted us both. When this interlude ended, could we really go back to pretending? We sat in my garden just before dawn, the morning dew settling on the roses around us. Jake held my hand as we watched the sky slowly lighten, neither wanting to speak first. Tom had returned yesterday, and reality crashed back like a tidal wave. "I don't want to let this go," Jake finally whispered, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "These past weeks with you, I've never felt more alive." I squeezed his hand, fighting back tears. "We knew this couldn't last forever. Your father's home, college starts soon." My voice caught. "We have to be realistic." "Is that what you want? To be realistic?" His eyes met mine, filled with an intensity that made my heart ache. "Because what I want is you. Only you." "Jake." I touched his cheek, memorizing the feel of his skin under my fingers. What we shared was beautiful, perfect. But we both know continuing would destroy everything. Your relationship with your father, my marriage, your future. He leaned into my touch, eyes closing. "I love him. He's my dad. But Sarah, the way I feel about you." "I know," I whispered, resting my forehead against his. "I feel it too. That's why we have to end it now, while we still can." The garden held its breath around us as Jake pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his neck, inhaling his scent one last time. His heart beat steadily against my cheek as he stroked my hair. "Promise me something?" he murmured against my temple. "Promise you won't forget. That you won't pretend it wasn't real." I couldn't if I tried. I pulled back to look at him, touching his face gently. "You awakened something in me I didn't know existed. I'll carry that forever." The sun began peeking over the horizon as Jake leaned in, pressing one final kiss to my lips. It was soft, tender, filled with everything we couldn't say. When we parted, I saw tears in his eyes matching my own. "I should go pack," he said roughly, standing. "Early flight tomorrow." I nodded, unable to speak. He squeezed my hand once more before turning away. I watched him walk back to the house, taking pieces of my heart with every step. Later that day, we played our roles perfectly. Stepmother helping stepson prepare for college. All proper smiles and appropriate distance. But sometimes our eyes would meet across the room, and in those moments, the electricity still crackled. That night, I lay awake listening to the house settle, remembering how these walls had witnessed our passion, our whispered confessions, our stolen moments of joy. Now they would keep our secrets, holding the echoes of what might have been. As dawn approached again, I heard Jake's door open, then soft footsteps in the hall. They paused outside my room for a long moment before continuing downstairs. I pressed my hand to the wall, imagining I could feel his presence on the other side. When Tom drove him to the airport that morning, I stayed behind, claiming a headache. We both knew a public goodbye would break our careful composure. Instead, I stood at my bedroom window, watching the car disappear. The house felt emptier than ever, filled with ghosts of touches, phantom sounds of laughter, memories of kisses that set my soul on fire. But as I touched my lips, remembering our last kiss in the garden, I smiled through my tears. Some loves aren't meant to last forever. They're meant to change us, to wake us up, to show us what's possible. Jake had done that for me, and I for him. Now we had to let each other go, carrying those precious weeks like a secret flame in our hearts. The walls would keep our secrets, and somewhere between midnight confessions and morning light, we'd loved completely, if not forever.